What's good, everybody? Welcome back to another edition of the Fantasy and Frames Redraft Target Series, where I'll be covering one of my favorite targets for fantasy football drafts in 2023, Cam Akers. Now, I'm sure you can see the Aaron Donald jersey behind me. Yeah, I'm a Rams fan, so we can get the he's just a homer comments out of the way. Go ahead and do that if you need to. But if you stick with me, I want to lay out the reasons why I think you should draft Cam Akers for fantasy football, regardless if you're a Rams fan or not. Now, if you're new here, please make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to hit the little bell that's going to pop up whenever you do subscribe so that you can be notified whenever our team drops new content. The support really goes a long way in helping this channel grow, and the fantasy football season is just right around the corner, and we're going to be pumping out content every week, all season long, to help you guys out. So also make sure to check us out on Twitter or X or whatever at Fantasy and Frames, and you can find me at Drew3MR. So as far as Cam Akers goes, right now, he's the running back one for the Los Angeles Rams. He's entering his fourth and final year on his rookie contract. The former Florida State standout was drafted in the second round of the 2020 NFL Draft, and he's had an up and down start to his career since being drafted. He's now joined in the backfield by two day three running backs, Kyron Williams, who was drafted in the fifth round of the 2022 NFL Draft, and Zach Evans, who was just announced today he officially made the team. He was just drafted in the sixth round of the 2023 NFL Draft. So, I mentioned up and down start to his career for Cam Akers. He's played at least 13 games in 2 of 3 seasons, but he's had an Achilles tear in the 2021 preseason that caused him to miss almost his entire second year in the league. And he's been an interesting and frustrating fantasy asset, admittedly, because while his end of season numbers haven't looked great for either of his healthy years, he's put together spurts of production during each season whenever given the touches to show us how talented he could be if given that full workload and if he can stay healthy for an entire year. During his rookie season in 2020, he didn't get more than 14 carries until week 13, where he rattled off 3 of 5 weeks with 21 plus carries. And then from weeks 13 to 17, even with missing a week due to injury, he was running back 22 with 2 top 12 weeks inside that. He put up a 171-yard rushing performance toward the end of the regular season, and then he rattled off another 130-plus yard rushing performance in the playoffs that year as well. Last season, he wasn't given 70+% of the snaps until week 13, but he played 70+% of those snaps every game after that from week 13 through the rest of the season. And during that time, Cam Akers was the running back 4 in fantasy, only behind Christian McCaffrey, Jerick McKinnon, and Austin Eckler. He had 3 top 10 running back weeks during that time, including a running back 1 overall finish in week 16 as well. Now, whenever it comes to weaknesses surrounding Cam Akers, there's 2 concerns I want to talk about. Neither of which really have anything to do with his ability or his talent whenever it comes to his play on the field. The first one is injuries. During his rookie year, he had a rib cartilage separation that caused him to miss a couple games early on. He had a high ankle sprain toward the end of the year as well, so he had to miss some time in his rookie year. But going into his second year, there was a lot of hype surrounding Cam Akers, and he ended up tearing his Achilles, as I mentioned, during the preseason. Now, for a long time, an Achilles tear to a running back was considered a death sentence to their career. However, if you look at the running backs that have dealt with this injury, Cam Akers is a very unique study. There really hasn't been a running back with his level of draft capital that was that young at the time of the injury as Cam Akers is. Most running backs that have experienced this injury were already much closer to the end of their career, or they just weren't as highly touted of a running back in the first place as Cam Akers was. So I know that concern is something that's still in the back of people's minds whenever they consider drafting Cam Akers. But based on the run he went on down the stretch last year, I think it's safe to say that injury is not affecting him as far as his play goes. The other weakness or concern surrounding Cam Akers is whatever weird situation that was going on between himself and the coaching staff last season. Those two just were not on the same page at all coming into the year. He only played 18% of the snaps in week 1, and then from weeks 2 to 5, the snaps did slightly increase anywhere between 30 to 50%, but he only hit 15 rushing attempts once during that period, and he just wasn't a big part of the offense at all. And leading up to the trade deadline, Cam Akers was inactive for a couple weeks due to what the team called personal reasons, but there were reports of some philosophical and football-related differences between Akers and head coach Sean McVay. There were reports that they were exploring a trade at the deadline, that there were multiple offers for Cam Akers, but Apparently none that were good enough for them to be comfortable with trading away their former 2020 second round selection. So it appears based on the work that he got toward the end of the year that whatever differences they were dealing with, they must have got over those. So now Cam Akers, he's entering his fourth year in the NFL, which is a contract season for him, and leads me into one of the many reasons why I like Akers so much for fantasy this year. Whenever it comes to running backs, I love me a good contract year narrative. If this all season has taught us anything, it's that running backs need to absolutely ball out to be able to be considered for a nice payday whenever it's time to start looking for their second contract. Cam Akers has plenty of incentive to play and play well this season, and the Rams have plenty of incentive to give him as much work as he can handle to find out what they truly have in their former second round pick that hasn't really been given a workhorse role for an entire season up to this point. Now, the main reason I think this is a possible outcome is that I'm not very impressed by the running backs behind him, which is just another reason that I'm all in on Cam Akers. As I mentioned earlier, the Rams have spent a day 3 draft pick each of the last 2 years on running backs, on Kyren Williams and Zach Evans. There have been some reports that Kyren Williams has impressed as a pass catcher in training camp this year, but I just personally think that he's a much less talented player compared to Cam Akers. And whenever you look at the lack of playmakers on this team behind Cooper Kupp, I think it'll be in the Rams' best interest to have their most talented players on the field as much as possible, and I think Cam Akers is pretty high on that list once you get past Cooper Kupp. Now, something that I don't think has been talked about enough this offseason is the potential improvement of the Rams' offensive line that was just flat out awful last year and dealt with a ton of injuries. So each year, Football Outsiders releases their adjusted games lost numbers, which estimates the impact of injuries on teams and provides a comparable total that often explains why teams improved or declined from one year to the next based on those injuries. Now, with all the injuries on the Rams' offensive line, they ended up setting a record for the most offensive line adjusted games lost in a single season. Their offensive line should be much healthier going into the season. They just use the 36th overall pick in the second round on a really impressive left guard that he's looked really good in camp and preseason. So assuming they don't deal with the same insane injury luck, I don't want to call it luck because it's not lucky, but assuming they don't deal with that unfortunate circumstance across their offensive line, I don't see any way that the offensive line gets worse compared to last year. And the other strength and the most important point when talking about Cam Akers is just how good he truly has been whenever he's been given the work. Once he's got out of the doghouse last year, even with the mess of the offensive line that we already talked about, no Matthew Stafford, no Cooper Kupp, a very predictable offense at that point. Cam Akers absolutely crushed down the stretch. From week 13 on, he was the fourth best running back in fantasy. He had the fourth most red zone touches of any player in the NFL. And whenever he got those touches, he was one of the best at converting them. His TD percentage on carries inside of the 5-yard line was the third best in the NFL. Now, Kyren Williams likely has the edge in pass protection, but Cam Akers has the edge literally everywhere else. We might as well throw some coach speak on there, just a little cherry on top. Sean McVay spoke highly of Cam Akers all offseason, and one recent example of this was whenever he was on the Sirius XM Mad Dog Sports Radio show, and he said that Akers was going to be a huge part of what they're doing moving forward and would be a central figure in this offense. And again, like I already said, whenever you look at the other pieces in the Rams offense other than Cooper Kupp, it's tough not to believe him. I don't know what other options they're going to have. Now, as far as his redraft value goes, according to Fantasy Pros half PPR ADP, Cam Akers is the running back 22 right now, which makes it pretty easy to see why he's a redraft target for me this year. Because if you go over to fantasyandframes.com and you look at my redraft rankings, I've got him as my running back 14. So now, while I have Cam Akers as my running back 14, you don't have to draft him that early to be able to get him on your team. Pay attention to that ADP and pay attention to your league mates and how they draft and take advantage of that. Use it to your advantage. If you were to just use my rankings, draft Cam Akers where I have him, the running back 14 in a typical draft is going to come off the board around the back of the second or beginning of the third round. However, that's not where Cam Akers is going right now. He's not coming off the board until the middle of the fourth round. So targeting Cam Akers allows you to add other players you're also high on in the second and third rounds and then grab another guy that I consider to be a second or third round value in the middle of the fourth round. So that's it. That's my case. Hopefully, I've shown you that Cam Akers is a very viable redraft target for fantasy football this year, even if you aren't a Rams fan. If you found this helpful at all, please like this video and subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. The 2023 fantasy football season is right around the corner, and Fantasy and Frames is going to be pumping out content all season long to help you win regardless of what type of league you play in. You can also visit fantasyandframes.com for more target profiles for Dynasty and Redraft and IDP, as well as rankings for Redraft and Dynasty leagues, IDP rankings, all that. We got it all. So make sure to check that out. Go over to Twitter, X, whatever. Follow us on Fantasy and Frames. Follow me at Drew3MR. And hop in the comments. If you're watching this on YouTube, hop in the comments. Let me know your thoughts on Cam Akers. If you would agree, disagree. I have no problem with people disagreeing with my opinions. I love hashing it out. I love talking about it. So drop a comment. I'll jump in. We'll talk about it on YouTube, or go over to Twitter, Drew3MR. Hit me up. Let me know your thoughts, and let's hash it out. But thank you so much for your support. And until next time, we're out, baby.